Love, right before we jump in today, this deep dive is brought to you by CertFuel. They've got a full securities industry essentials course with, adaptive study quizzes, smart flashcards, and unlimited practice exams that are weighted just like the real thing. You can check it out at certfuel.com.
Yeah, it's honestly a great resource if you're gearing up for the SIE.
Absolutely. Okay, so picture it. It is late October 1929. The Roaring Twenties have just come to a completely screeching catastrophic halt.
Right, fortunes just vanishing literally overnight.
Exactly. The public's trust in the financial system is totally broken. And frankly, it's just the absolute Wild West out there. I mean, rampant speculation, zero transparency, just incredible amounts of unchecked fraud.
It was a mess.
A total mess. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at the ultimate result of that historical chaos. We are targeting a massive, really critical chunk of your securities industry essentials exam.
We're talking about regulatory entities, agencies, and market participants.
Which is a lot of words, but...
But to put the stakes perfectly in perspective for you, this makes up a full 16% of the SIE exam.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 12 questions standing between you and a passing score. It is the absolute foundation of everything you are studying.
Right.
Like, if you do not understand who regulates the industry, what their specific jurisdictions are, and who the players actually are, the rest of the material is just going to feel like a completely foreign language.
It really is. But here's the promise we're making to you right at the top. We know you're studying. We know you are probably staring at dry textbooks.
Staring at them and absorbing none of it.
Exactly. So we are not going to just read you a bulleted list of rules to memorize, because rate memorization completely fails you when the exam pressure hits, and the question is worded just slightly differently than your flashcard.
Precisely. So our core methodology today is focusing entirely on the why and the how.
Right.
Like, why do these rules exist in the first place? How do the mechanisms of these agencies actually function out in the real world?
Because when you understand the logic behind it, the exam questions stop looking like trick questions.
Yeah, they start looking like basic common sense. You can deduce the right answer simply by knowing how the machine works.
Right, even if you haven't seen that exact scenario before. And to help us do that, to really make this sticky for your brain, we're going to use some recurring characters today.
I love these guys.
Right. We're bringing in a cast to illustrate the absolute circus that finance can be. First, I want you to picture Investor Ivy.
Okay, Investor Ivy.
Ivy is ridiculously wealthy. She lives in this sprawling, multi-million-dollar mansion with, entirely too many chandeliers. And while she has a lot of capital, she's sometimes a little clueless about how the gears of finance actually turn.
Right, but she loves counting her net worth.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially the value of that massive, fully paid off house.
And pay close attention to that detail about the house, by the way, because the way the government views the value of Ivy's mansion is going to be the key to unlocking one of the most frequently tested concepts on the entire exam.
We will definitely be coming back to that. Next up, we have Broker Bob.
Go, Bob.
Bob is a fast-talking, slightly sweaty, high-energy finance guy. Sometimes he's acting as an agent, meaning he's just playing matchmaker. Sometimes he's acting as a principal, meaning he's trading out of his own firm's pocket.
And we'll define exactly how that changes his compensation later.
Yeah, but the most important thing to know about Bob is that his firm always seems to be perpetually teetering on the absolute brink of bankruptcy.
Which, again, is entirely by design for our scenarios. Bob's incredibly poor risk management is going to be super useful when we need to explain the safety nets.
Right, like what happens when a firm actually goes completely under. And finally, we have Municipal Mary.
Oh, Mary. She's so stressed.
Highly stressed out municipal advisor. Her entire life right now is dedicated to helping her town's very ambitious, completely delusional mayor finance a ridiculous town monorail project.
A monorail, of course.
She has to navigate the bond market to get this thing funded. So Ivy, Bob, and Mary are going to be our guides through the regulatory maze today.
And the way we're going to navigate this maze is by following a strict hierarchy. We are going to start at the absolute top of the regulatory food chain, the federal government level.
The big bosses.
Exactly. Then we will look at how that power cascades down. We'll look at the delegated authorities, the state-level regulators, the safety nets, and finally, we'll dive all the way down into the actual plumbing of the market itself.
Let's start at the very top then. The boss of the block, the Securities and Exchange Commission, widely known as the SEC.
The SEC.
The source material points out that the SEC was born from the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Their stated mission is threefold, right? protect investors, maintain fair and orderly markets, and facilitate capital formation.
That's the textbook definition, yeah.
But I don't just want you to memorize the year 1934. What actually happened between the crash of 29 and the Act of 34 that made this necessary?
Well, to really understand the why of the SEC, you have to look at the mechanics of that 1929 crash. In the 20s, you had a market driven by massive, completely unregulated leverage. People were buying stocks on margin, meaning they were borrowing up to 90% of the purchase price from their brokers.
Which is insane to think about today.
It's totally insane. So when the market started to dip, brokers issued margin calls. They demanded cash. Investors didn't have the cash, so brokers liquidated their positions, which drove the market down further, triggering more margin calls.
It was a vicious downward spiral, a total cascade failure.
Exactly. And the public, rightly so, completely lost faith in the system. They felt the game was rigged by insiders, so Congress realized they couldn't just let the industry self-correct. They needed a supreme federal watchdog.
Right. So you had the Securities Act of 1933, which tackled the primary market forcing companies to tell the truth about what they were selling.
But the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 tackled the secondary market, the actual day-to-day trading. It created the SEC to be the federal referee.
That is why 1934 is the magic year. It was the government basically saying never again.
Yeah. And the structure of the SEC is fascinating because it's designed to prevent sudden radical shifts. You have 5 commissioners.
5 of them. Okay.
Appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, but they serve staggered 5-year terms. So one term expires every single year.
I always think of this like a pizza.
A pizza.
Yeah, think of it like a 5-slice pizza. You only replace 1 slice a year, so the whole thing never goes completely stale all at once, but you also never have a completely brand new, untested pizza.
That is a very weird analogy, but it works perfectly. And crucially, by law, no more than 3 of those 5 slices or commissioners can belong to the same political party.
Right, the bipartisan rule. It forces the ship to turn slowly. It prevents the SEC from wildly swinging from extreme deregulation to extreme overregulation every election cycle.
Because the markets crave stability. If the rules changed entirely every 4 years, capital formation would just freeze. Companies wouldn't know how to plan.
Okay, so they have this incredibly stable structure. And they have immense power. Right. They oversee the stock exchanges, the broker-dealers, the investment advisors. And I need to raise a huge red flag here for you, the listener.
Oh, yeah. This is exam trap number 1.
This is exactly where the exam writers will try to trip you up.
The SEC has a hard limit on its enforcement capabilities.
A very hard limit.
They can only bring civil enforcement actions, lawsuits, injunctions, fines.
They do not have the legal authority to put anyone in a jail cell.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second, because that sounds totally counterintuitive. You have this supreme federal watchdog created to stop financial fraud, but they can't actually lock up the fraudsters.
Nope.
Why wouldn't Congress give them criminal authority?
It comes down to the separation of powers. Criminal convictions require an incredibly high burden of proof, right?
Yeah.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil actions only require a preponderance of the evidence.
If the SEC had the power to write the rules, investigate, and throw people in federal prison, it would be an immense, unconstitutional concentration of power.
Okay. That makes sense. Let's put Broker Bob in the hot seat to illustrate this.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, the listener, a direct question here. Think about this scenario for a second.
Let's hear it.
Let's say Broker Bob orchestrates a massive intentional Ponzi scheme. He steals $10 million from investor Ivy, completely wiping out her cash. This is blatant criminal fraud. He is caught red-handed. Can the SEC throw Broker Bob in federal prison?
Give them a beat to answer.
Yeah.
No, they absolutely cannot.
So what is the actual mechanism? What does the SEC do when they catch Bob?
They act on the civil side immediately. They freeze his assets. They file a lawsuit to try and claw back the money for Ivy. They permanently ban him from the industry.
But for the prison sentence? For
the prison sentence, the SEC must pick up the phone and refer the case to the Department of Justice. The DOJ federal prosecutors bring the criminal indictment.
That distinction is incredibly highly tested. SEC fines and bans. DOJ arrests and imprisons. If you see an exam option claiming the SEC issued a 10-year prison sentence, cross it out.
Immediately.
Now, beyond enforcement limits, we also need to understand their jurisdictional limits. The SEC regulates securities. They don't regulate the entire universe of finance.
Right. So if investor Ivy decides to buy a traditional fixed life insurance policy, The SEC is not involved. That's state insurance commissioners.
And if she wants to speculate on, like, crude oil futures,
Then she's stepping out of the SEC's jurisdiction and into the yard of the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
you have to know where the SEC's lawn ends. Okay, so we've established the SEC is the supreme boss. But let's look at the sheer scale of the market. There are thousands of broker-dealer firms, millions of trades a day. The SEC is big, but they don't have the manpower to micromanage every single branch office in America.
Which is exactly why the system relies heavily on delegation. And that brings us to the self-regulatory organizations, or SROs.
If the SEC is the principal of the high school, sitting in the corner office making the ultimate decisions, who are the hall monitors?
The SROs are the hall monitors. They are the ones actually walking the corridors, checking passes, and handing out the daily detentions.
But we need to be incredibly precise with definitions here. An SRO is a non-governmental organization.
I want to repeat that because it is a common point of confusion. SROs are not the government.
They are industry organizations that the SEC legally delegates authority to. It's a system of self-policing, but operating under the overriding eye of the SEC.
Exactly. The hall monitors can write their own rule book for the hallways, but the principal still has to sign off on it. An SRO can draft a new rule, but they must submit it to the SEC for approval.
Okay, let's talk about the heavyweight champion of the SRO world, FINRA.
The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority.
If you are taking the SIE, you are literally sitting for a FINRA-administered exam. Their history is highly testable because of the dates involved. How did FINRA come to be?
So for a long time, you had two massive self-regulatory bodies. The NASD, which regulated the over-the-counter market, and the regulatory arm of the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
Having two separate rule books created massive redundancies. So for efficiency, they merged. And they merged relatively recently. FINRA was officially created in 2007.
Okay, stop right here. I fell for this exact trap on a practice test. The exam will ask about the creation of FINRA, and they will absolutely throw 1934 in there as an answer choice to see if you're rushing.
It is a classic misdirection. 1934 is the SEC. FINRA is a modern efficiency merger. FINRA is 2007. If you pick 1934 for FINRA, you're handing over a free point.
Don't do it. So what is FINRA's actual day-to-day job?
They do the heavy lifting. They write the conduct rules for broker-dealers. They handle licensing, like making sure you pass your SIE. They conduct routine examinations of branch offices.
And their enforcement powers are severe. They can fine Broker Bob, suspend his license, bar him, or expel his entire firm.
Which effectively puts the firm out of business. Because you cannot operate a broker-dealer in the U.S. without being a FINRA member.
But FINRA is not the only SRO in town. There's another one that operates under a completely baffling set of constraints, the MSRB.
The Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board.
Yes, this is Municipal Mary's territory. Let's set the scene. Mary's mayor wants to build a monorail. The town doesn't have the cash. So they need to issue municipal bonds. The MSRB writes the rules for that process.
Right. There are specific rules to recognize. Rule G11 dictates the priority of orders. Rule G32 deals with delivering official statements to investors. And Rule G34 requires the underwriter to apply for CUSIP numbers.
And just to clarify, a CUSIP number is basically like a barcode, right?
Yeah, a 9-character unique identifier for every registered security in the U.S. and Canada. Without a CUSIP, you can't track or settle the trades.
Okay, so the MSRB writes all these complex rules for Mary. But here is the massive plot twist. And it is so counterintuitive that it is guaranteed to show up on the exam.
The MSRB writes the rules, but the MSRB possesses absolutely zero enforcement power.
Zero.
None. They cannot fine anyone. They cannot suspend anyone. They are purely a rulemaking board.
Hold on. I need to stop you there because my brain just hit a speed bump. That makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Why would Congress create an SRO, fund it, and then completely strip it of the ability to punish rule breakers?
It's an excellent question. It comes down to jurisdiction and politics. The municipal bond market involves sovereign entities, states, cities, local governments.
Oh, right.
It's highly sensitive. When Congress created the MSRB in 1975, they deliberately separated the legislative function from the executive function. They didn't want the MSRB becoming a rogue agency targeting local governments.
So the MSRB is basically a think tank.
Essentially, yes. They write binding regulations, but they rely on other cops on the beat to actually execute the arrests.
That is wild. Okay, so listener, let's test how this actually plays out mechanically. Think about this scenario. Municipal Mary is acting as a municipal advisor to the town. She intentionally violates MSRB Rule G32. The MSRB sees her do it, but they can't touch her. Who actually steps in to enforce that MSRB rule against Mary?
Let them think for a second. Because Mary is an advisor, it is the SEC that steps in.
Okay, but what if the town uses broker Bob's firm to sell the bonds? Bob breaks an MSRB rule. Who enforces it against Bob?
For a broker-dealer like Bob, FINRA is the enforcer. FINRA enforces its own rules, and they enforce MSRB rules for their members.
It's a jurisdictional matrix. And what if a massive commercial bank breaks an MSRB rule?
Then the federal banking regulators step in, the FDIC or the Federal Reserve. The key takeaway here is if the exam asks who enforces an MSRB rule, the answer is never the MSRB.
Lock that in. That is a guaranteed point. All right, we've talked about the SEC and the SROs. Now we need to look at the broader ecosystem, the money movers and the state cops. Let's start with the biggest money mover on the planet, the Federal Reserve.
The Fed, they manage monetary policy, right? But for the SIE, you don't need a PhD in macroeconomics. You need to understand one specific intersection, Regulation T.
Reg T. This governs the extension of credit by broker-dealers to their customers. It dictates how much money Broker Bob can lend investor Ivy to buy securities on margin.
And this goes back to the 1929 crash again. Unchecked leverage was the fuel. So in 1934, Congress gave the Fed the power to put a speed limit on that leverage.
And under Reg T, the Fed set that speed limit. The initial margin requirement is 50%. What does that mean mechanically?
If Ivy wants to buy $100,000 worth of stock on margin, Reg T dictates she must deposit at least $50,000 of her own cash. Bob can only lend her the remaining $50,000.
But here is where the exam writers set a very subtle trap. You must differentiate between the initial requirement and the maintenance requirement.
Yes. The Fed sets the initial hurdle, but the stock market fluctuates. Let's say Ivy buys that stock, and the next week, the value plummets to $60,000. Bob still lent her $50,000, so her equity is now only $10,000. She's well below 50%. Does the Fed care?
No, the Fed does not micromanage daily fluctuations. Reg T only applies to the initial purchase. Once the position is open, the risk management shifts to FINRA.
This is a crucial handoff. FINRA Rule 4210 establishes the maintenance margin requirement. For a long stock position, FINRA sets that minimum at 25%.
If Ivy drops below 25%, Bob issues a maintenance margin call. She has to deposit cash immediately or he sells her stock.
So if the question asks who sets the initial margin, it's the Fed via Reg T. If it asks who sets the maintenance margin, it's FINRA. Fed equals initial. FINRA equals maintenance.
Don't mix those two up. Okay, let's shift down to the state level, because Bob also has to deal with state regulators enforcing what are poetically known as blue sky laws.
I love that name.
It's the best. Back in the early 1900s, you had grifters traveling state to state, selling entirely fraudulent investment schemes. The Supreme Court justice noted they were selling investments that had no more backing than so many feet of blue sky. They were literally selling empty air.
So states passed blue sky laws requiring salesmen to register locally and prove their securities weren't just blue sky.
And the creation of the SEC didn't erase these state laws.
Mm-hmm.
They exist concurrently. So Bob has to register federally with FINRA and with every state he does business in.
And to coordinate all of this, we have NASAA, the North American Securities Administrators Association.
Which brings us to another classic trap. The exam will try to make you believe NASAA is a powerful enforcement agency.
It is not. NASAA is an association. The best way to conceptualize it is as a highly organized, glorified group chat for state regulators.
That is exactly what it is. The regulators from New York, California, Florida, they use it to coordinate and share info.
But NASAA itself has zero enforcement power. They cannot issue a fine. If a broker violates a law in California, the California state regulator brings the hammer down, not NASAA. NASAA can complain about you in the group chat, but they cannot write you a ticket.
Glorified group chat. Remember that. Okay, let's completely shift gears. We've talked about the cops, but what happens when the rules fail? When a firm's risk management collapses and the money runs out, we are moving into the safety nets.
And this is arguably the most highly tested comparison on the entire SIE, SIPC versus the FDIC.
Students bleed points here by mixing up acronyms and coverage limits. Let's start with SIPC, the Securities Investor Protection Corporation, created in 1970. And right off the bat, SIPC is a nonprofit membership corporation. It is not a U.S. government agency.
It's an industry-funded safety net, and its singular purpose is to protect customers if a broker-dealer becomes insolvent and fails.
This is where we bring Bob's terrible business practices back into the spotlight. Let's say Bob's firm finally goes bankrupt. The doors are padlocked. Investor Ivy has millions held at Bob's firm. SIPC steps in to ensure Ivy doesn't lose her assets just because her broker failed.
But SIPC does not offer unlimited protection. The limits are strict. SIPC provides total protection up to $500,000 per separate customer capacity.
Separate capacity meaning like her individual account is one, and a joint account with her husband is a second separate capacity.
Precisely. But the trickier part is the sublimit. Within that $500,000 total, there is a strict sublimit specifically for cash, and that sublimit is $250,000.
Okay, listener, we need to drill down on this math. Think about this scenario. Bob's firm goes bankrupt. Ivy has a single individual account. At that exact moment, she holds 0 stocks. She had sold everything. She just has straight cash. She has $300,000 in cash at Bob's firm. How much of that money does Ivy lose?
Let them do the math. The math dictates that she loses $50,000.
Walk us through exactly why. Because the total limit is $500,000, right? Why isn't her $300,000 fully covered?
Because of the nature of the asset. The $500K is the total umbrella. But the rules explicitly cap the protection for cash at $250K. It doesn't matter that she's under the total limit. She hit the cash ceiling.
So SIPC replaces $250,000. The remaining $50,000 is utterly unprotected.
Right. For that $50K, she just becomes a general unsecured creditor at bankruptcy court.
Why does SIPC have a lower limit for cash? Why penalize cash?
Regulators want SIPC to protect investors. They do not want you using a broker-dealer as a high-yield checking account. If you want a perfectly safe place to store cash, put it in a traditional bank. The lower limit is a disincentive to hoard cash at a brokerage.
That makes incredible sense.
Yeah.
Now let's hit the biggest misconception about SIPC. What does SIPC not cover under any circumstances?
SIPC does absolutely not cover market losses, period.
Let's run the scenario. Ivy deposits $500,000. She tells Bob to buy a highly speculative tech stock. The next day, the CEO goes to jail for fraud. The stock plummets to 0. Does SIPC reimburse her?
Not a single cent.
Why not? The money is gone.
Because the broker-dealer didn't fail. Bob's firm is completely fine. SIPC is not insurance against terrible investment decisions. It only activates if the firm itself goes bust and your assets physically go missing.
They protect the custody of the assets, not the value. That is the golden rule.
Yep.
Okay, contrast that with the FDIC.
The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, first difference. It is an actual independent agency of the U.S. federal government, and its mandate is entirely different. They insure traditional bank deposits, checking, savings, CDs.
If a question mentions a brokerage account and asks about insurance, cross out FDIC immediately. The FDIC does not touch securities.
Right. The FDIC was created in 1933 to stop bank runs. By having the government guarantee deposits, the public knows their money is safe, and the coverage limit,
$250,000 per depositor per bank.
So let's summarize the side-by-side for your flashcards. FDIC protects bank deposits. SIPC protects brokerage accounts. FDIC limit is a flat $250K. SIPC is $500K total, with a $250K cash sublimit. FDIC protects against bank failure. SIPC protects against broker-dealer failure. Neither protects against bad investments.
And FDIC is government. SIPC is nonprofit. I love how this forms a causal chain. The Fed establishes policy and Reg T margin limits. Broker-dealers use that credit. If they fail, SIPC catches the assets. And parallel to that, the FDIC protects the banks.
It's all highly interconnected plumbing.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered regulators and safety nets.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the people placing the bets, the investors. The SEC categorizes investors basically into 2 buckets. Retail and institutional.
Right. Retail investors are everyday individuals. Because they lack deep financial expertise, the SEC affords them the highest level of protection. Brokers have to jump through massive suitability hoops.
But institutional investors, pension funds, massive banks, they trade in millions. The SEC assumes they can fend for themselves.
Yeah, they have armies of lawyers. They don't need simplified disclosure documents.
But there is a very specific, highly tested subcategory that bridges the gap, the accredited investor. This is legally defined under SEC Rule 501.
Achieving accredited status unlocks a completely different tier of markets. You can participate in private placements, like unregulated tech startups.
The SEC's logic is basically, you either have the specialized knowledge, or you are so wealthy that if this startup goes bankrupt, you aren't going to end up relying on the state for food.
Exactly. Rule 501 establishes 3 pathways. First is income. Over $200,000 as an individual or $300,000 jointly in the last 2 years.
Pathway 2 is professional knowledge. Holding a Series 7, 65, or 82 license makes you accredited, regardless of money.
And the third is net worth. You need a total net worth exceeding $1 million.
But hold on, sounding the alarm. This is the single most common trick question. Let's bring back investor Ivy and her massive mansion.
When calculating that $1 million net worth, the law explicitly requires you to exclude the value of the person's primary residence.
This trips up so many people. Scenario. Ivy has $500,000 in liquid cash. She owns a fully paid off $3 million primary residence. Her total mathematical net worth is $3.5 million. Is investor Ivy an accredited investor?
Legally, no, she's not.
Explain the logic. Why does the SEC ignore a $3 million asset?
Well, let's do the math. 3.5 million minus the 3 million house leaves her with an eligible net worth of only 500,000. She's $500,000 short. The why is about liquidity and basic welfare. Private equity is highly risky. It frequently goes to absolute zero.
They're lottery tickets.
If the SEC allowed her to use home equity to qualify, she might take out a massive second mortgage. If the investment goes to zero, the bank forecloses and she is literally out on the street.
They want to protect her basic need for shelter. They care that you have $1 million of riskable capital. So on the exam, manually subtract that house. Okay, now let's decode the middlemen executing the trades. Broker-dealers.
The operational engine room. The confusing part is that a single firm can act in two distinct capacities depending on the trade. A broker or a dealer, but never both on the exact same trade.
And how they act dictates how they get paid. I have the ultimate memory trick for this. Write this acronym down on your scratch paper at the testing center. ABCs versus DPMs.
Let's untax that.
ABC. Agent equals broker equals commission. Let's use broker Bob. When Bob is acting as an agent, he's a broker. He plays pure middleman. Ivy calls and says, buy me 100 shares of Apple. Bob doesn't own any, so he goes to the public market, finds a seller, buys them for Ivy. For that matchmaking, he charges a flat fee, commission, ABC.
Now, contrast that with DPM. Dealer equals principal equals markup or markdown. When Bob acts as a principal, he is a dealer.
How does that work?
Ivy calls with the exact same request, but this time Bob looks at his firm's internal inventory and realizes he already owns thousands of shares of Apple. So he simply takes 100 shares from his own stash and sells them directly to Ivy. He is trading for his own account.
And he doesn't charge a commission here?
Correct. He makes his profit on the price difference, a markup. If he bought them at $150 and sells them to Ivy at $152, that $2 difference is his markup. DPM, dealer, principal, markup.
The exam writers love this. They'll ask, firm XYZ executed a trade and charged a commission. What capacity was the firm acting in?
You see commission, you think C and ABC, they acted as an agent or broker.
Mechanical lock. Now, we also need to categorize broker-dealers by their operational size. Specifically, introducing brokers versus clearing brokers.
An introducing broker is the storefront. They take orders, build relationships, but they do not have the back office infrastructure to hold millions in cash or settle shares.
So where do the assets go?
The introducing broker must route all funds through a clearing broker. The clearing broker is the heavy machinery. They hold custody, execute settlement, and generate statements.
Which leads to another classic trap. If a question asks who holds customer funds, the answer is never an introducing broker. They literally just introduce the client to the clearing firm.
Very clean divide. There's also one specialized category, the prime broker.
VIP concierge service. They deal exclusively with massive hedge funds. A hedge fund might trade through 20 different brokers, but all trades route back to settle centrally at the prime broker, who provides custody and securities lending.
Excellent. So we've mapped out agencies, safety nets, investors, and brokers. Let's hit the advisors, market makers, and the actual plumbing.
Investment advisors, or IAs. They provide investment advice for a fee. If they manage over $100 million, they register federally with the SEC. Under that, they register with the state. But the key is their legal standard of care.
The battle of the standards. Fiduciary duty versus suitability.
Right.
An investment advisor owes a strict fiduciary duty. It legally mandates they act in the absolute best interest of the client, putting the client above their own profit.
So if Fund A pays a kickback commission to the advisor, but Fund B is mathematically better for the client,
the fiduciary duty compels the IA to choose Fund B. Contrast that with a broker-dealer, historically held to suitability, now upgraded to regulation best interest or Reg BI.
And those sound similar.
They do, but Reg BI is transaction-based. It requires an appropriate, non-conflicted recommendation at the time of the trade. An IA's fiduciary duty is an ongoing, holistic relationship of trust.
Don't assume they are identical. Okay, moving on to issuers and underwriters.
Issuers create and sell securities to raise capital, like a corporation building a factory or Marystown issuing bonds. But they need a bridge to the public. They hire an underwriter, an investment bank, to bring them to market.
And there are specific NRI rules here. Rule 2269 requires brokers to disclose in writing if they have a financial interest in a distribution they are recommending. And Rule 5250 prohibits payments for market making. An issuer can't pay a broker to artificially trade their stock to make it look popular.
Which segues into market makers. What are they? Their entire business model is standing ready to buy and sell a specific security all day long, providing constant liquidity.
They maintain a two-sided market, a bid price and an ask price. The bid is what they pay to buy from you. The ask is the higher price they demand to sell to you.
And they profit off the spread between the two. They take on the risk of holding inventory to keep the market moving smoothly.
And finally, the absolute deepest plumbing. When that trade happens, who moves the digital paperwork? First, transfer agents.
They keep the master ledger. They maintain the official records of who owns every single share. They cancel old certificates, issue new ones, and physically distribute quarterly dividends.
But they interact with the massive clearing corporations. The behemoth is the DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation.
The DTCC is the central nervous system. They settle the vast majority of all securities transactions in the U.S., quadrillions of dollars. If Ivy buys a stock on Monday, by Tuesday, T+1 settlement, the DTCC is the digital ledger where all those brokers net out their obligations and settle the books.
And real quick, the DTCC was created in 1999 for merging the DTC and the NSCC. The exam might use those old acronyms, but they roll up into DTC.
Right. And the last piece of plumbing, the OCC, the Options Clearing Corporation.
Sounding the final alarm. Major trap here.
You have to understand counterparty risk. The OCC acts as a central counterparty for options trades. To eliminate the risk of a seller defaulting, the OCC literally steps into the middle of every single trade. They become the buyer to every seller and the seller to every buyer.
But here's the trap. The OCC only guarantees options contracts. It's in the name, Options Clearing Corporation. If the exam asks who settles a regular equity stock trade, do not pick the OCC. That's the DTCC. The OCC is strictly for options.
Very clean jurisdictional distinction to end on.
Okay, take a deep breath. We covered an immense amount of ground. Let's lock this in with a high-energy, rapid-fire recap of the top 5 takeaways. Number 1, enforcement boundaries. SEC versus DOJ.
The SEC brings civil actions only, fines and bans. Any criminal enforcement like a prison sentence must go to the DOJ.
Number 2, SRO enforcement. FINRA versus MSRB.
The MSRB writes the rules for municipal securities but has zero enforcement power. FINRA enforces them for brokers. The SEC enforces them for advisors.
Number 3, safety nets. SIPC versus FDIC.
SIPC protects against broker-dealer insolvency up to $500K total, $250K cash maximum. It does not cover market losses. FDIC protects bank deposits up to $250K.
Number 4, accredited investor calculation.
For the net worth pathway, you need over $1 million, but you must completely exclude the value of the primary residence.
And number 5, broker-dealer capacities. ABC versus DPM.
Agent equals broker equals commission. Dealer equals principal equals markup or markdown.
Boom. That is 16% of your entire SIE exam material, totally decoded. Congratulations on sticking with it. By understanding why the 1934 Act was passed, why the House is excluded from net worth, and how the OCC works, these questions are going to feel like pure common sense.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one provocative thought to mull over. We talked a lot about the strict lines between retail investors who need protection and institutional investors who are sophisticated.
Built in the 1930s.
Exactly. But look at today. Zero commission mobile apps, fractional shares, massive retail groups moving markets on social media and forcing hedge funds into short squeezes. Ask yourself, are those 1934 definitions starting to become obsolete? Are protections built for investor Ivy 90 years ago helpful to a modern app-based trader? How might the SEC have to rewrite the rules to keep up with tomorrow?
That is a genuinely fascinating question, and it shows why this industry is never static. Best of luck with your studying. Keep digging into the why behind the rules, and we will see you on the next deep dive.